Life is a lot like jazz. It's best when it's improvised. Now, while this quote from George Gershwin can be true in life, it made me think of a few questions, such as how does jazz affect the brain function, and does jazz help strengthen or weaken our brains? Jazz is often seen as fun music to move around or dance to, but what else can it make our brains do? Some studies have shown that it can improve functions such as memory skills and planning. And even compared to how other genres of music improve our brain function, it comes out much more important in strengthening brain function and activity. It is truly fascinating. First of all, how does music in general affect the brain? And what parts specifically does it affect? And how does listening to music strengthen those areas? Well, I'm glad you asked. Here I have a diagram entitled Music in the Brain, and it's cut the brain into different areas depending on how music affects that area. Up here we have the corpus callosum, which connects both sides of the brain. Then we have the motor cortex, and this is involved in movement while doing dancing or playing an instrument. In the front, we have the prefrontal cortex, which controls behavior, expression, or dance decision making, and this is important for jazz improvisation. At the bottom, we have the nucleus accumbens and the amygdala glands, and this is involved with emotional reactions to music, like feeling sad or happy with a song. At the top, we have sensory cortex, and this controls feedback while playing instruments or dancing. Underneath that, we have the auditory cortex, and this listens to sounds, perceives, and analyzes tones. Underneath that, we have the hippocampus, and this is involved in music, memories, experiences, and contexts. At the very back, we have visual cortex, and this is involved in reading music or watching your own dance movements. And at the very back of the brain, we have the cerebellum, and this is involved in movement while dancing or playing an instrument, as well as emotional reactions to music. As you can see, music does a lot to our brain's functions, but how does improvising jazz and listening to that genre specifically affect our brains? Something that makes jazz so unique is its improvisation, the way it sounds so funky, if you will. A couple of jazz musicians thought this too, and they decided to come together and they became brain researchers on the subject of how improvisation in jazz affects the brains. Right away, their research showed that musicians who improvised in jazz showed relaxed muscles, calmness, and slowed breathing. They called it the zone. Composer and musician Frederic Bianacci, director of computer music research, and developer of music technology, including the virtual orchestra, has been in and observed the zone. In the zone, he says, action and awareness merge. Inner analysis is bypassed, and the brain's predilection to micromanage is denied. Time becomes suspended, ideas begin to flow, and performance unfolds without effort. Frederick, his fellow researcher Rich, and another doctor came to the conclusion that when improvising jazz, they had identified different patterns of brain activation and deactivation during improvisation, particularly in a region known as the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, or better known as DLPC, which controls executive functions such as attentional skills, decision-making, planning, and creativity. Activation of the DLPC is associated with a state of focused attention, while deactivation can indicate a mind wandering, which I'm sure your brains probably did while I said all those confusing words. Here I have an MRI from their study, and it's the brain of a musician who was improvising in jazz music. As you can see, he started out without much special brain activity, but as he went on, the prefrontal cortex started to get more and more active, and as the creativity flowed out of him, it became more active and it strengthened that part of his brain. This is amazing. Improvising jazz can be proven to improve functions like decision-making and planning, which are important to know and do in everyday life. Some researchers at Johns Hopkins Hospital wanted to know how jazz affects the brain too. They decided to actually make a keyboard that can monitor the brain's function while listening to jazz improvisation. It's pretty cool that they decided to make a keyboard to monitor the brain function. What better way to show how jazz affects the brain than an instrument you actually used in jazz? The keyboard showed how, again, the prefrontal cortex responded with jazz, and it was able to reveal how making up the melodies and rhythm on the spot made the brain work extra hard, and it also strengthened that part of the brain. A guitarist in the 80s, Pat Martino, had an aneurysm and he forgot everything. He forgot who he was, his family, and even his name. It took him years to relearn everything he had previously known, but the one thing he quickly relearned within that year was how to play jazz music on his guitar. Even with a part of his brain being taken out, he quickly relearned how to play jazz music. This just shows how much music, but especially jazz, sticks in your brain. In closing, jazz is a really fun genre of music, and not only is it great for dancing too, it can help improve functions such as decision making, memory, and creativity. Whether you're improvising jazz or just listening, it will have great benefits for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.